evening and welcome to the Newshour agenda. I'm Madhavdas. Viewers, amidst the diplomatic row with Canada, Canada's leader of opposition, Pierre Poilievre, has cancelled Diwali celebrations that were scheduled to take place at the Parliament Hill in Ottawa. The move has drawn condemnation from the Indian-Canadian community, especially as no reason was given for the abrupt cancellation. The organizers of the event, the Overseas Friends of India-Canada, slammed the decision, calling it a discriminatory and insensitive act. The president of the Diaspora group, Shiv Bhaskar, wrote to Canada's leader of opposition saying that the Indian community is feeling betrayed and unjustly singled out. He's highlighted that the event was an annual celebration which has been continuing for 23 years and demanded an apology from Poilievre. The issue also generated political heat back home in India. While BJP slammed the leadership of Canada, Congress said that we shouldn't interfere.
Unfortunately, Trudeau has made the entire thing very toxic because he is dependent on the radical Khalistani elements for his vote. Now, unfortunately, the opposition leaders also have picked up the same thing because they are also dependent, would like to be dependent on these Khalistani votes, which is considerable now.
Indians settle over there. They have become citizens of Canada, and different rituals and festivals from different countries are being adopted over there. They are okay, so we don't have to interfere in it.
Meanwhile, amidst the Diwali row, which is said to be about the fallout of K-terrorist Hardeep Singh Nijjar's killing, a top Canadian government official has admitted to leaking sensitive information against the Indian government in the Nijjar case to Western media. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's national security advisor admitted that the information was leaked to a US newspaper, The Washington Post. So imagine, viewers, the hit job by Western media against India when the India-Canada diplomatic face-off was unraveling was not some great piece of investigative journalism. It was Canada feeding anti-India information to Washington Post to push a one-sided narrative against India. Not just Trudeau's national security advisor, even the Canadian Deputy Foreign Minister David Morrison gave a statement that feeding information to the US newspaper was a part of their larger communication strategy.
Within our strategy, we were talking to different audiences. And so we deliberately chose, as Madame Durand said in her introductory remarks, a credible, internationally read newspaper that would carry our side of the story. We chose a journalist who had a long record of background in this particular issue. He had written on it a number of times before.
The reason why we offered, as I said in my opening remarks, a background interview to the Washington Post was really to make sure that our side of the story will become clearly and be widely spread, especially at the international level. That was the strategy behind the background interview we gave.
While Diwali celebrations have been blocked in Canada, let's take a look at how the Festival of Lights is celebrated globally. In the United States, the US President has hosted a Diwali celebration at the White House. There's also a bill to declare Diwali as a state holiday in Pennsylvania that has been passed. In 2023, the New York governor made Diwali a school holiday in the city. In Fiji, Diwali is observed as a public holiday since 1879. In Malaysia, Diwali is observed as one of the public holidays. In Mauritius, a public holiday as a large Hindu population celebrates Diwali there. In Nepal, Diwali is called Tihar and celebrated on 5 days. In Sri Lanka, Diwali is celebrated by the Tamil-speaking community. In South Africa, there are plans to declare a national holiday on Diwali.
You're watching the News Hour at 10, debate number 1 on Times Now, Super Prime Time.
All right, let's take this across to our guests now. Joining us with us on the panel are our distinguished guests. We have Ashok Sajanhar, who's of course a noted diplomat. We have Gaurav Sharma, Hindu Forum Canada representative here. We have Dr. Swasti Rao, who's an associate fellow at the Manohar Parrikar IDSA. We have Wyatt Claypool, who's host of the National Telegraph. We also have Terry Milewski, who's a senior Canadian journalist. Let me start with you. In fact, thank you so much for joining us this evening here. And let me begin with you. Terry Milewski, what could be possibly the reason for Pierre Poilievre cancelling this Diwali celebration? Because as you've heard from various groups, not just here in India, there are Indo-Canadian groups, this was so far all diplomatic. Now it's acquiring a very, very different color, whereas this entire controversy could perhaps even affect the people-to-people relations of India and Canada, judging by the reactions that have been coming in.
Well, there has been an increasing momentum, especially from Hindu Canadians, but from Indian Canadians more generally, to include many, many Sikhs who are not Khalistanis by any means. It's been a push by them to push back on the Khalistanis who have been trying to expand the space in which they operate in Canada, and as you've seen, successfully so. Most recently, for example, the Khalistanis have been really quite tastelessly, really disgracefully photobombing the memorial ceremonies for the victims of the Kanishka bombing of 1985. You can't even mourn in peace now without a gang of guys showing up with yellow flags and shouting Khalistan Zindabad. So they, as I say, the Khalistanis have been trying to expand the space that they have in which they're free to operate, and now their critics are trying to push back. And it seems to me that we still have more to learn about why exactly the Conservatives have cancelled their Diwali celebrations. It's, look, you know perfectly well, I don't need to tell you, it's a non-political event, it's a pleasant event, most people just enjoy it. It's not become previously, to my knowledge, ever a political football. Now it is, apparently, because of its cancellation. So, was there some security problem? We shouldn't rule out that there may simply be some sort of threat, and that's why it was cancelled, or there may have been a backstage conflict between the pro-Khalistan side and the anti-Khalistan side, that so irritated the leadership that decided, the hell with it, let's scrap the whole thing. So let's hold off until we know definitively from the leader, Mr. Poilievre, exactly why did this happen. And don't brush us off with vague excuses. We want to hear exactly why was this cancelled. And depending on the answer, then we can come down on him if need be.
Yeah, well, one would expect that if there are security reasons, then just say there are security reasons and come out with it. Why there should be any prevarication on that count is certainly not clear, Mr. Milewski. But let me put your question across to Gaurav Sharma. Gaurav Sharma, are we putting the cart before the horse? Should we wait for an official reason coming in? Or do you believe that at the end of the day, all politicians in Canada now are engaging in some kind of competitive appeasement of various vote banks, and Mr. Pierre Poilievre is perhaps no different from Justin Trudeau in that regard? Is that the message coming out of what has just happened in regard to the Diwali celebration? Gaurav Sharma.
Thank you for having me. The message which we are getting right now is very, very insensitive from the leader of opposition here. Let me just draw a couple of points here. So, right now, Diwali is being celebrated and it's a school day off in New York. We have seen visuals from NASA where Sunita Williams is wishing everyone a happy Diwali. We have seen celebrations in White House. President Biden is celebrating Diwali over there. So now we have a diplomatic relations with Canada has a relation with India, as well as the US also has some spat going on with India on the on some issue. But dragging Hindus into this is something which we found which has come out of the blue. Diwali is a festival which is celebrated by Hindus, Sikhs, Jains, and Buddhists across Canada. So I'm not sure why this event was cancelled. So we need to have much better reasoning from the leader of the opposition. And this is becoming, what we fear right now is that this anti-India or, this diplomatic spat should not lead to an anti-Hindu sentiment which may lead to more Hinduphobic incidents in Canada.
Absolutely. And in fact, I just want to bring in Vyot into that, because Vyot, we're not just talking about the fact that, Diwali is celebrated in different parts of the world, either it's the United States, whether it's the United Kingdom. And we've seen several top leaders. There's no doubt about the fact that it is, of course, something that has received a lot of attention. But there's a context to what's happening in Canada. Leave aside the diplomatic spat that we're currently seeing. Look at the kind of hate crimes that we've seen take place at Hindu places of worship. And I'm going to quote to you the examples. On the 23rd of July 2024, a Swaminarayan temple in Edmonton was vandalized. On the 14th of August 2023, a Lakshmi Narayan temple was vandalized by Khalistan elements in Surrey. Yet another temple being desecrated in Canada in the Ontario province on the 5th of April 2024. And there's another incident that has been flagged up in the Greater Toronto area. There's a long list of such incidents. And it's in that context that whether, there is some kind of pandering to people who are not just spreading hate, but are vandalizing places of worship of Hindus, and a Hindu important festival, perhaps the most important one of all, Diwali, being disrespected in this way is certainly not going to send out a positive message. Vyot Claypool, can you hear me?
Oh, I can. Sorry, I just didn't know that you were referring to me. Well, the funny thing with well, not the funny thing, but with the desecration or with the vandalization of many Hindu temples is that Hindus have joined their Christian counterparts in having their religious buildings attacked, not quite had arson attacks against them, because that's something else that's happening across Canada. Churches are being burnt down, but because it's politically incorrect to make it a big issue, the government doesn't seem to care. I would generally agree with Terry Malevsky that with the cancellation of the Diwali event on Parliament Hill, we don't specifically know what the reason is yet, and we should probably hold off judgment until we find out more about it. But the thing is, I think if we went back and during Chinese New Year that we had Chinese New Year celebrations canceled, I think everyone would correctly identify that that seems a little bit strange, and maybe it might have to do with ongoing interference scandals from the Chinese government, but that would also be deeply inappropriate to then start targeting specific Chinese events because we might have a problem with the CCP.
Right. So, Swasti Rao, I'd like you to come in on this. How do you respond to Vyot saying that, while the incidents themselves perhaps are not acceptable, there are other places of worship that have been attacked, and there's a precedent to this in terms of the Chinese New Year being cancelled. Is that really an acceptable explanation according to you, Dr. Swasti Rao?
So very quickly, no, that is definitely not any kind of a explanation about what we're just discussing. See, this is something deeper. I think by cancelling this event, they have also lost an opportunity to try and make genuine bridges with a very huge community, with a huge community out there in Canada. And somewhere, I think this is also clear that the opposition itself is very myopic, because they have also failed to draw the necessary distinction between the Canadian Indian community on the one hand and the actions that they feel on which they require more communication with the Indian government on the other hand, right? So I think they have just been reinforcing the kind of stereotypes that we thought here in India that probably they stand against, because the kind of statements that the opposition leader had put out against Prime Minister Trudeau. But now it seems, and especially because it has not really come with a formal explanation as to why this thing has happened. I mean, obviously, this is left to speculation, and whatever speculation that we can do at our end, and then you juxtapose us with the development that only today there was an official confirmation on the Canadian side that they were instrumental in leaking the name of Home Minister Amit Shah to the Wall Street Journal, who was one of the first platforms that actually reported about specifics of this particular problematic case. It is very clear that things are not boding well. And I see, in my opinion, this is something which is not going to settle well at all, because by I think with the opposition, I think there seemed to be a chance of actually building back the trust deficit that the Trudeau government had precipitated between India and Canada. But frankly, I do not really see that happening. So for me, it's a kind of a dampener.
Yeah.
I did not expect this kind of a myopic, short-sighted, and I would say diplomatically extremely immature behavior by actually cancelling out, a celebration which actually unites everybody. So this was a great opportunity to try and build back the trust and say that we stand by the Canadians and the larger Hindu community, and what they have done is absolutely the opposite.
Mr. Claypool, I'd like you to respond to Dr. Swasti Rao, because the timing, the optics, everything of this is just so bad at a time when people were hoping that perhaps it's just a blip in Indo-Canadian relations. Maybe after the elections, one can hope for a fresh start. The start does not seem to be even there on the horizon when this kind of an action happens. And we also have, of course, information now coming out about how there were strategic leaks given to a United States newspaper, the Washington Post. So this wasn't any kind of deep investigative journalism. There were actually ministers and senior officials from Canada who were actually just feeding that information, and it was being planted in the Washington Post. That's clearly evident from the statements that are coming out today. And both of these episodes together really don't make things look very positive.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, too, that what I was saying was obviously not that there's never been a Chinese New Year event canceled. And I was saying that that would be equally as inappropriate as what is currently happening with Diwali being canceled. I don't know the motivations of Mr. Poilievre in regards to the Diwali event being canceled. But regardless, it's still inappropriate that it was. We just don't know whether or not there's been some brinksmanship inside of the Conservative Party, someone demanding that they not allow the event to be held. And yeah, it probably is connected with this sort of fake patriotism type of a stance that Justin Trudeau has taken, where either you're with the Canadian government or you're with the Indian government, rather than simply just being on the side of whatever the truth actually is. That's, I think, what's going on, and I hope that Conservative Party advisors aren't falling for this, considering especially that Hindu Canadians next to evangelical Protestants are the biggest supporters of the Conservative Party by ratio.
All right, but domestic politics apart, Ashok Sajanhar, I'd also like you to bring into the other aspect of how this entire information has come out in the Washington Post in the first place. The very fact that there are government officials, national security advisor level officials who are actually putting out this information, somewhere or the other, this is going to lead to a very, very serious question that, not even the Canadian press, it's the US press where they're being deliberately given this kind of information to set the Canadian narrative right. And the best part is, there's still no proof of what really the basis of those allegations are. They're just that. They're still allegations.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on your show. And you're very right. There are still, happen to be only credible allegations. You go to the street and you ask 10 people and they repeat the same story. So these are allegations, and that sort of, you make up your case for that. But if you permit, I will also like to comment on what, has been discussed previously. What also bothers me and what also surprises me a little bit, that in all the countries, it is basically the government that hosts this celebrations, whether it is Diwali or any other function, any other celebration. Like you would have seen, Mr. Biden has done it in the White House. These are the biggest celebrations ever of Diwali. We have seen Anthony Albanese doing it in Australia. So it is basically always the government that does it. So I'm a little perplexed as to why has it here in this case to be, as far as the leader of the opposition is concerned, who was supposed to be, hosting this event in the parliament. The second issue is that, when they do it, it is not for India. It's not basically to reach out to India that they are doing. They have a huge population of Indians, Indian Canadians, not Indians per se, Indian Canadians. And it is something very, close to them. Diwali is celebrated, as I think one of the speakers said, it is, celebrated by Sikhs. And as we've been talking, even as far as the Sikhs are concerned, there is a minuscule portion that would be supporting the whole idea of Khalistan. All the others are basically, non-Khalistani people. They are normal people who are sort of, leading their life there. Also, there is a very significant community, out of about 1.8 million. If you say about 800,000 are Sikhs, there's still about 1 million who are Hindus and, or other different religions, but primarily Hindus. And they are also Canadian citizens. So basically what you're doing is you are reaching out to the Indian Canadians. And here you cancel it because you have a diplomatic row with India. You think that, it is not kosher to appear to be standing with India. I think it is, I agree with the comments that have been made. It is totally short-sighted. It is totally myopic what has happened. As far as this leakage to the Washington Post, I think it really couldn't get worse than that. I think when we had heard Mr. Trudeau stand up in the Parliament on 18th of September, we thought that was the rock bottom, that was the nadir that the relationship could reach. Then we heard the charges that were made by the RCMP. And after that, Trudeau himself taking the floor in a press conference and again repeating these charges without any evidence. And now coming that confidential information has been served on a platter to the Washington Post. So basically it is, what Canadian government is trying to do. It is not trying to sort out the issue, not trying to get to the bottom of who is responsible, but it has manufactured an artificial case and it is going out to its friends and partners. And that's what, I heard this interview, what this gentleman said, that we have gone to our, those who think like us, whether it's UK or in US, and they're trying to magnify the voice of Canada and project it as if it is coming from independent sources, not coming from Canada.
Okay.
It is from independent sources, so the credibility of that information would be much greater than if it would be to be coming only from Canada.
Terry Milewski, ordinarily,
deplorable.
Ordinarily, any government, when it puts out information, one would expect them to approach their own national sources, sources of information and media within their country. It's a prerogative which official wants to talk to whom, but it does seem that there is an attempt to couch it in the credibility of a US media outfit, and there's a deliberate attempt at trying to create a narrative which, the Canadian government has now stuck its neck out on and is perhaps going out on a limb to defend.
Well, let me just make this point that if you're looking for the culprits who have given enormous credibility and put the weight of their government behind their narrative, then you look no further than the Indian government, which has all but endorsed the American charges against the intelligence services of New Delhi. It is the Indian government which has told the Americans and the world that, we are taking these allegations very seriously, and that has named and shamed and fired Vikram Yadav, the intelligence officer accused by the Americans of having organized a murder plot to murder a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil. The greatest push, in other words, the heaviest push on the face of this earth in favor of that American narrative and those American charges is coming from the Indian government.
But that's the point, Terry. But that's exactly the point. If you'll permit me, the point I'd like to draw over here is that the United States has put out a set of facts. They've given hard evidence to back up their claims. And you certainly don't have politicians who are going around town, tom-tomming all of these in their parliament or trying to politically position themselves. That's the difference. As far as Canada is concerned, there's information going to the Washington Post, but that information is not reaching the Indian government. That's the stand that the Indian government has been taking vis-a-vis Canada and US, and they are two pictures in contrast, aren't they?
Well, I agree that the Indian posture is incoherent. It's contradictory. They're saying the same charges. They're saying that the Canadians are being absurd and the Americans are being reasonable.
Because there's no proof from Canada's side. Are you aware of what the proof is, Mr. Milewski?
Well, you know what the proof is?
Well, at least in the case of the indictment in the United States court, there is a process of judicial, scrutiny that has happened. So therefore, I think there's a world of difference between the two. Let me bring in Ashok Sajanhar. Ashok Sajanhar, is there an inconsistency on the Indian side or on the Canadian side?
Obviously on the Canadian side. I think this is ridiculous to suggest that there is incoherence as far as Indian position is concerned. India has been very open. India has been very transparent on all this. We've said, bring evidence, and we are happy to look at it. That's what the Americans did. They brought us evidence. We are very happy to look at it. Mr. Trudeau and his cohort, his dispensation, have not been able to get us any evidence whatsoever. Even till now, the only thing that they are indulging in is skullduggery, sort of, going behind your back, feeding narratives, feeding information, without having a shred of evidence. So, and if you think that, without any evidence, you are going to be able to tell us that, we want to investigate your agencies, your, organizations, that will not fly. You have to come up with evidence. It is 18th June when this Hardeep Singh Nijjar was killed. Today it is the end of October 2024. It is 18 months. Not a shred of evidence. That is, these two are absolutely different cases. Don't
respond to that. Terry
try to
Milewski.
confuse the matters.
There's nothing but credible allegations, and I don't know what those credible allegations are. Credible allegations themselves sounds like an oxymoron to me.
Case, it's the same murder plot targeting the same people by the same people. It's one murder plot to kill both Panoon and Nijjar. Panoon in New York and Nijjar in Canada. It's one plot. The person indicted in that indictment by the FBI is heard there saying, look, we're out to get Panoon and Nijjar is also a target. So if you don't believe me that it's one plot against multiple targets, believe the plotters.
Swasti Rao, how do you respond to that?
Well, I think the major problem since the beginning has been what we have been trying to say. And even if you look at the confirmations that have arrived today, okay, they do say that they've confirmed certain names. But again, there has never been a clarity on what kind of evidence has been furnished. So I guess there has to be, there has to be clear communication on this part. I think there is something which has really been deliberately made to miss in this conversation, which is otherwise a very logical conversation. Why would India, a rising power, such a major actor on world stage, a country with excellent relations with the other Western powers, would actually shoot itself in the foot by doing something very logical with the US, taking forward a set of allegations logically with the US, and would do the opposite with Canada? I think what the Canadian side needs to understand is that they have to tell what the hard evidence is. And please understand that Canada does not really, Canada is a part of Five Eyes, but Canada does not have its own specific, intelligence agencies, okay? So it is very much dependent on the kind of intel that it is getting from other powers, and that intel is mostly raw. So unless you actually process that intelligence and convert it into hard evidence, raw intelligence means nothing. If you look at the number of raw intelligence inputs that are received and discussed among, say, for example, any network, the number is astounding. You have to actually channelize it into something which is meaningful. And that is precisely what the Indian side has been saying, that you are talking about raw intelligence inputs. It does not really is tantamount to saying that you have hard evidence. Kindly give us the hard evidence.
Absolutely. I don't think there's any question about it. There may have been suggestions that have come out from that indictment and other statements that have been made. But at the end of the day, if you're going to make such serious charges without hard evidence, without a due process of cross-verification of that intelligence into evidence, then certainly there are going to be questions raised, and serious questions about whether Trudeau, by jumping the gun, has tied the Canadian government and Canadian diplomacy into knots. And perhaps many would question that with it further plummeting day after day, like what we've seen today, what really will be the point in which these relations will ever be restored if it continues this kind of a free fall. I'd like to thank all our panelists for joining us. Gaurav Sharma, Dr. Swasti Rao, Ashok Sajanhar, Ward Claypool, as well as Terry Milewski. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.